Conor experiences distressing nightmares every night in which he witnesses his mother's distressing ordeal. Each time he wakes from these dreams, he gazes out the window into the night's darkness. This all began when his mother began chemotherapy, and due to his parents' divorce, Conor lives with his mother, who is battling cancer. He's been providing care for her for a significant period. However, seeing his mother's weakened state fills Conor with deep sadness and pain. To alleviate the bitterness within him, Conor frequently doodles during class, using this creative outlet to express his thoughts. Because Conor often stares a taller individual, this person consistently seeks others to confront and harm Conor after school. One evening, Conor's mother stumbled upon an old-fashioned projector and decided to watch the iconic King Kong scene where the giant ape falls from the Empire State Building. This triggered memories of Conor's terrifying nightmares. That night, while Conor was busy painting his thoughts, he heard a faint voice calling out to him from the darkness. To his astonishment, the ground trembled, and the yew trees in the nearby cemetery began to transform. In Conor's terrified eyes, the once lush yew trees morphed into a monstrous figure. The monster slowly approached Conor, but rather than running away, he stood his ground to protect his mother. The monster then seized the frail Conor and informed him that he would visit every night at 12:07 to share 3 stories. In return, Conor had to reveal a secret hidden in his heart when he finished listening to the 3 tales. Initially, Conor refused. The monster, with its fiery eyes, abruptly awakened Conor. Startled, he rushed to his mother's bedroom. Despite his mother's reluctance to let him see her in such a weakened state, she couldn't resist Conor's pleas and allowed him to sleep by her side. The following morning, Conor woke up early and ventured outside. When he looked at the nearby yew tree, he still couldn't shake off the fear from the previous night's encounter. Around this time, Conor's grandmother returned to take care of her seriously ill daughter. She suggested that Conor's mother consider giving up custody, a proposal strongly opposed by both Conor's mother and the young boy himself. As emotions ran high during the heated argument, Conor's mother collapsed to the ground. Witnessing this incident left Conor even more terrified and helpless. Late that night, he relinquished his bedroom to his grandmother, spending a restless night tossing and turning on the living room sofa. Initially, Conor hoped that the monster wouldn't return, but as the clock's hands slowly moved, the earth trembled once again, and there stood the monster, waiting outside his house. Conor wished the monster would somehow make his grandmother go away, but the monster firmly declined. Left with no other option, Conor reluctantly agreed to listen to the monster's first story. In this tale, a wise and revered old king suffered the heartbreak of losing his 3 sons, one after another. The queen, unable to bear the loss of all her children, passed away, leaving the king in profound despair with only his orphaned grandson for company. The little prince was raised by the old king, but just as he was approaching manhood, the elderly king married a young and beautiful new queen. Before long, the old king passed away suddenly, and rumors began to circulate that the new queen had poisoned him in her quest for the throne. Once, there was a young prince who couldn't become king right away because he was too young. So, according to the law, the queen ruled for 1 more year. The queen, though, liked being queen and wanted to marry the prince to keep her power. But the prince didn't want that. He escaped with his loved one night. They rested under a big yew tree, but the next morning, the prince found his loved one dead. This gave the prince a chance to win people's support. A strange thing happened. The yew tree turned into a monster that helped the prince remove the queen from the throne. Conor thought this was a story about good triumphing over bad. However, the monster shared a twist. It wasn't the queen who killed the prince's loved one, but the prince himself, all to win people's favor. It turned out the queen hadn't poisoned the king. He had simply grown old and passed away. The queen wasn't a murderer. So, the monster took the queen and carried her to a distant village by the sea, where she started a new life. This story taught Conor that people are complicated, and there's not always a clear line between good and bad, much like his grandmother. Inspired by the monster's tale, Conor began to grasp his grandmother's actions better. However, when he returned to school, he found himself once again facing the tall man's bullying. Meanwhile, with his mother hospitalized, Conor's grandmother had to call his father to take care of him. Spending time with his father made Conor want to leave the gloomy town. But his father hesitated because he didn't want to hurt Conor's mother and grandmother. This left Conor feeling frustrated and upset. When Conor returned home, he was overwhelmed by his emotions and began to destroy things, even tearing the hands off a clock that had been in the family for over a century. As 1207 approached, the monster reappeared and began to share a second story. This story took us back 150 years, to a time of rapid technological advancement. In a local community, a traditional pharmacist and a parish priest had different approaches to helping the people, though both had good intentions. The community followed the priest's guidance, rejecting the pharmacist. The pharmacist retreated to the remote mountains, but never stopped searching for life-saving herbs. On the grounds of the parsonage, there stood a yew tree that the pharmacist greatly coveted. Initially, the priest firmly refused to grant it. A day came when the priest's two beloved daughters fell gravely ill, and none of his efforts could cure them. With no other options, the priest eventually approached the pharmacist and agreed to fulfill his requests, even if it meant abandoning his own beliefs. In a desperate bid to save his daughters, the priest went against everything he had stood for. However, this decision left the pharmacist feeling disappointed in the priest. Ultimately, the priest not only lost his daughters, but he also suffered retribution from the monster for his choices. At first, Conor didn't fully grasp the monster's perspective, but after some explanation, he understood the lesson. Life presents everyone with hardships and tough decisions. Beliefs are deeply sacred, and staying true to them often means adhering to one's moral principles. After the monster finished the story, it encouraged Conor to seek retribution against the priest. Conor thought he was wrecking the priest's house, but when he woke up, he realized he had actually made a mess of the living room that his grandmother had carefully arranged. At that moment, Conor's grandmother returned from the hospital and was met with the chaotic scene inside the house, including the damaged century-old clock. She didn't say a word, but her silent disappointment weighed heavily on Conor. Tearfully, he watched his grandmother retreat to her room. The following day, Conor had an encounter with his father. Instead of berating Conor for losing control, his father compassionately assisted him in cleaning up the room. He also took the opportunity to explain the reasons behind the divorce from Conor's mother. The two then headed to the hospital, where they found Conor's speechless grandmother and his mother, who put on a facade of strength. In an effort to console Conor, his mother claimed that a new medication derived from a yew tree could cure her illness. Back home, Conor reached out to the monster, hoping it could somehow help save his mother. After persistent requests, the monster agreed rather casually. Conor breathed a sigh of relief, finding some temporary solace. The next day, Conor met his father, who was preparing to return to the United States. Sadly, he had to bid his father farewell. Late at night, Conor discovered his grandmother watching home videos featuring his mother. In one of the videos, he spotted the creature his mother had described as a goblin, which resembled the monster he had encountered. Conor realized that his first encounter with the monster had been through his mother's artwork. With his imaginative brush, he recreated the character's image. The dark monster symbolized Conor's suppressed emotions, and this newfound understanding fueled his determination to face his fears and return to school. However, the tall bully at school had perceived Conor's intentions. Conor was withdrawn, thin, and difficult to read, but he wanted to garner attention by provoking others. Recognizing Conor's plan, the tall bully decided to treat him as if he were invisible. At that moment, the monster reappeared and shared the third story with Conor. In this story, an invisible man finally broke free and chose to stand up for himself. With the monster's encouragement, Conor's long suppressed emotions reached a breaking point, and he confronted the tall bully, landing him in the hospital. Upon returning to school, Conor noticed that his classmates were beginning to take notice of him. However, the looks in their eyes were filled with avoidance and fear. Later, Conor visited his mother again, but she delivered heartbreaking news. The new medicine containing yew tree ingredients hadn't worked. Understanding that this was likely his mother's way of saying goodbye, Conor ran to the yew tree. He unleashed his anger on the massive tree, and the monster struggled to contain his emotions, pushing Conor to share the fourth story they had agreed upon. In that moment, Conor was overcome by fear. All Conor wanted was to return to the hospital and be with his mother, but the monster showed him the most terrifying scene from his nightmares. The mountain shook, the earth split open, and his mother began to fall into an abyss. Despite himself, Conor rushed forward, desperately gripping his mother's hand. But right before his eyes, his mother still tumbled into the abyss. Under the relentless pressure from the monster, Conor finally revealed his secret. In truth, Conor had already come to terms with the fact that his mother was inevitably going to pass away, and the weight of this impending loss had left him breathless. While his heart longed for the suffering to end, he understood that when it did, he would lose his beloved mother completely. After hearing his story, the monster consoled Conor, reminding him that humans are complex creatures. They may believe in a brighter future, but they also experience the harsh realities and pain of life. Conor's pent-up emotions had nearly led to a disastrous incident, which is why he had kept his true feelings suppressed for so long. Seeing Conor finally release the pain in his heart, the monster felt relieved. It offered gentle comfort to Conor and gradually helped him fall asleep. When Conor awoke, it was already late at night. However, his grandmother urgently grabbed him, and without a word, they rushed to the hospital. While waiting at a railway crossing, they were halted by a passing train, and in that moment, Conor confessed his mistakes to his grandmother. Both of them were overwhelmed by the impending reality, and they held each other tightly, weeping on each other's shoulders. Afterward, they hurried to the hospital in time. This time, instead of avoiding reality, Conor made the courageous choice to confront the impending death of his mother. Conor clung to his mother tightly as the monster walked beside them. The mother's final moments were spent with her family. Conor eventually started living with her grandma when her mother passed away. Only then did Conor understand that the space he had been using as his bedroom had actually been his mother's boudoir prior to her marriage. Conor spotted a picture book that had been created just for him on his mother's desk. The 3 tales that the monster told him are exactly what the album's 3 tracks contain. He also noticed a young child sitting on the monster towards the album's finale. He just realized that the monster was his mother's creation and personal patron saint at this time. And with his mother's brush, he was able to transmit love to himself, which eventually helped him to be freed from the psychological tumor and reclaim his bravery for life. Thanks for watching, guys.